So, a warm welcome back to your Primary Care Network Development Programme short modules. And today we're focusing on leading for personal well-being, which, as you'll see, complements everything we've been doing and leads to the final module on managing time. As we know, it's an absolutely critical moment in health and social care to be attending to our well-being. We read on a regular basis, and I'm sure your experience personally and locally confirms the fact that people are reviewing their own choices in terms of the work they do and how they work, and whether or not they actually continue to work in the same roles and in the same way that they have been doing, currently called the mass resignation. And we read frequently in the national press of the fact that many, many hundreds of staff are leaving the NHS on a weekly basis as a result of challenges to well-being. So I hope this short film gives you an opportunity to pause and take your own self-care as seriously as you take caring for your patients. In fact, you might argue that without the former, it really isn't possible to achieve the latter as well as you might like to. So what do we mean by well-being? It is distinct from resilience. Resilience is usually considered to be the skill of being able to bounce back from adversity, but well-being is a more enduring state than that. It is being comfortable, being healthy, being happy. It's a sense of optimism. It's a sense of potential. It's a sense of physical, not necessarily calm, but ease. And so we might describe it and recognize in the discussion about the description that it's a common experience for us or a less common experience for us. And that's actually where I'd like to start. I'd like to look at two things in this short film. The first is your own personal well-being, the dimensions of that and how you might measure and address those dimensions. And the second is the importance of your own well-being for your team and what can you actually do to enhance your team's well-being, recognizing that our own well-being is massively influential of our team's well-being, but equally our team's well-being massively influences ours. So I've just completed a pilot called the NHS Leaders Wellbeing Programme. And from that and the research that we undertook to deliver that, it became clear that there are three critical components of well-being in healthcare that we need to look at. One is our own disposition, not just our position, but our disposition in health and care. The second in blue is our context. What can we do to influence our environment? And the third is to recognise that we as leaders do influence our team's well-being because we are part of their context. So well-being matters. What can we do to ensure that we enhance it? First of all, let's look at ourselves. So as I'm describing these different influences on well-being, please be reflecting on your own ability, capacity, and attention to these areas. So there are the following areas: mindset, connection, gratitude, learning, mindfulness, and physical activity. I'll start with physical activity because most of us recognize that most of us actually do address physical exercise as a source of well-being. So I'm not going to say much more about that than to remind us all that half an hour, 5 days a week is the recommended amount of physical activity. And also just to restate the importance of the hormonal influence that physical activity has on psychological well-being. And that leads beautifully actually to mindset, because we do need to take care of and pay attention to our state of mind. Our well-being is massively influenced by our perception, by what we pay attention to, by our thinking process, by our ability to regulate our emotional reactivity and choose to respond rather than to instinctively react. And we're talking about those things here. We're thinking about how able are you to emotionally self-regulate in the face of demands or in the face of a heightened emotion in yourself. How aware are you of your thinking practice and your thinking style, and how you might catastrophize as opposed to solutionize? And how aware are you of your perceptual filters, so that you might notice what's going wrong rather than what's going well? Really important perspectives there. And of course, one of the perspective shifts that can be of great benefit to all of us is our degree of social network, our social connection. And that's what's meant by the word connection here. How well are you managing your relationships and nourishing your relationships, so your identity doesn't become too focused on the work that you do rather than the person that you are? That important but little thought of difference between a human doing and a human being. And touched on already when we talked about mindset, the importance of gratitude. Recent research has suggested that paying attention to how grateful we are on a regular basis is the single most beneficial influence on our well-being. And there are apps and also gratitude journals, but without either, you could simply pause now and just write down, and it is important to write these things down, the 3 things that you're most grateful for today. And you might want to pause the video to do that and just notice the effect it has. At the bottom there, learning. Human beings are sense-making creatures. We want to bond, we want to survive, we want to thrive. And part of thriving is developing our competence and our capability. So always being involved in something that stretches and challenges and extends us is an important part of our well-being. It influences our self-efficacy, and that in itself is very important. And then the final one here is linked to gratitude, and in some ways it's linked to connection and mindset. It's about mindfulness, by which I don't mean meditation, though of course mindfulness is greatly enhanced by meditation and is a route through to mindfulness. But what I really mean by mindfulness is paying attention. So if you were to simply pause now and try to move away from what you're thinking and instead to your senses, what do you notice? What can you see? What can you sense about, for example, the chair that you're sitting on and the way that it carries your weight? What can you taste? Maybe you've just had a delicious cup of coffee or a sip of water. And what can you hear in the immediate vicinity, in the middle distance, and in the long distance? It's a beautiful exercise to do, because it's very difficult to be thinking about work or what other things are demanding your attention if you're also trying to notice what you can hear in those 3 vicinities. So a very simple tool that I'd offer you is this Wellbeing Wheel. And for each of those 6 dimensions, the Wellbeing Wheel invites you to score yourself where 1 is low and 10 is high on well-being. And as a result, you might notice that your mindset scores 9, your connection scores 3, your gratitude scores 4, your learning scores 7, mindfulness 10, physical activity 8. It gives you an idea, a very quick, easy, visual, graphic representation of where your strengths are in maintaining your well-being and where you might invest more attention to benefit your well-being, to ensure that your passage every day is smooth rather than wobbly. So something for you to think about there. Equally, let's now move to think about teams. If we can imagine every member of our team paying attention to their well-being, then that environment might influence us. And similarly, in leadership positions, our leadership influences those that we lead. So we are part of their context. We are part of the environment that they need to manage. And so us paying conscious and explicit attention to how we manage well-being in our team environment really matters. We can shape team context through the way that we attend to it. So what is it that team well-being needs? Interestingly, Professor Michael West did some research recently through the General Medical Council, as you're probably aware. And one of the things that came out from that report, which I think was called Caring for Patients, Caring for Doctors, was that most doctors need three things to maintain their well-being and their motivation: autonomy, belonging, and a sense of competence. Autonomy and belonging are quite clear and recur in what I'm about to show you. Competence is quite distinct, actually. I think it's the sense of having the scope to use capability and to grow capability. So definitely important. And again, shows up in some ways in these three things, which are a reinterpretation of Professor Michael West's work for a multidisciplinary environment. So still autonomy matters in the sense of having some say, being able to influence and shape the world in which I operate in some way. Similarly, feeling appreciated and feeling welcome, as if I belong, feeling included, absolutely critical. And also having a sense of purpose and meaning, so that the work I do is significant in terms that I value, but also is significant in being valued by others and being valuable in an objective sense. Now, you might be asking the question, all very well and interesting, but how do I actually amplify or develop these characteristics in the team which I'm working? First of all, the question is, do you have conversations with your team about their well-being? There is a very easy way in to influencing a sense of inclusion and purpose and control, and that is to start doing just that. So I'm going to suggest two different approaches you might use. The first is this, which is available from the Northwest Leadership Academy, and it's an audit, a team wellbeing audit based on healthy team behaviours. There's also an individual leadership version of this, which you might be interested in. But essentially what you do is you take this, distribute the questionnaire to the team, they score out of 5, and then what you have is an indication of areas that are strengths that can be enjoyed and appreciated, but also areas for development. So for example, it could be we help each other connect to the wider meaning of the work we do, the contribution we make, creating a sense of belonging. If that scores low, then you'd have a conversation about how you can address that. If this scores low, we get to know one another on an individual level, formally and informally, treating each other as human beings, not just as colleagues. Where that scores low, you can then have an individual and shared conversation about how you might address that. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can just see a partial diagrammatic representation of the shape of those scores. The essence of this is to ensure that team well-being is a shared aspiration, not something you do for the team, but something that you generate with the team. And that's very much the thinking of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, whose version of talking with the team is essentially focused on these 3 questions. So having a conversation with either each individual member of your team, maybe also actually a good framework for thinking and reflecting on your own well-being, but equally a team meeting could be used to have a conversation about these 3 things. First, what makes a good day at work for us? What gets in the way of good days? And what can we do together to create more good days? And of course, it's tempting to shy away from something like this, because we might think that our colleagues are going to mention pay and workload. Neither of those things are necessarily within our collective ability to shape and influence. But actually, there will be things that are within your influence, are within your scope, that you can address together. And the Institute for Healthcare Improvement talks about this. It's so easy to overestimate the importance of one defining moment and underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. Too often we convince ourselves that massive success requires massive action that maybe we can't take. And therefore, rather than the one big thing, go for an aggregation of marginal gains, a small potpourri of changes, of actions that create a well-being system. New habits, in other words, that together create real change. And the Institute for Healthcare Improvement's version of this is to distinguish pebbles from boulders. So they say we can identify the pebbles in our shoes, what gets in our way on a daily basis. That doesn't ignore the boulders that exist, workload, staffing, and technology, but it enables us to convert conversations from if only they would to what can we do today with what we've got, where we are right now. It helps everyone see the organisation as us and not them. Of course, this is a really positive framing of our local potential. But if every team did pay that kind of quality attention to well-being, it may just influence and shape the larger organisation and system. This is an actual example from a ward environment of a team that used this approach, and they put all the pebbles and created a mountain of the pebbles, and in every one of their team conversations adopted the attitude of, we may not be able to move mountains, but let's see if we can shift some pebbles. And every time they took small steps that created real improvement in an area that influenced well-being negatively, they shifted it to the jam jar with a lid on it. A lovely idea that may have its own local translation and local application. Other things that you might do, I'm just going to run through a series of 10 possibilities to whet your appetite. Some teams and individuals have brag boxes, so they keep feedback, positive feedback that's not been solicited, stored so that they can get it out on a demanding day and restore a sense of perspective. Mood magnets. Teams have different coloured magnets to signify different moods of each team member on a daily basis. So it could be red for not so great mood, green for a great mood, blue for a reasonable mood. And without actually having to talk at all, the mood magnet that's relevant for you that particular day goes right next to your name. And so everybody knows and realizes and appreciates how to work together on that day. Colouring walls act as a lovely distraction, and I've seen in several team environments in health and social care, just a large poster with some colouring pencils or pens next to it, so that in a corridor, rushing between meetings, an individual can stop and just colour in a small section of what becomes a team artwork. And there are huge posters that are used for this available on Amazon. Not that I'm seeking to advertise Amazon, but easily accessed there. Some teams timetable 1 hour for well-being, whether or not that be silent walking, paired walking, meditation classes, just a conversation about well-being. 15 minutes in each team meeting for different people to talk about something that's interesting them, so that there's vitality, vibrancy, passion and interest brought into conversations, not as a distraction from work, but as a complement to work. Check-ins, asking, how are you? But not just leaving it there, how are you really? And listening for the response, which links to mindfulness sessions, which are being introduced into some GP practices, some office environments and some hospital environments. And again, very easily available apps, for example, Headspace, that can help guide and create opportunities for structured time for people. Let's not forget the importance of the small appreciations, the thank yous on a daily basis that can lift our hearts and remind us of the importance of the work that we're doing. And maybe using a version of the mood magnets, team members' names on a board with post-it notes of appreciation when and if those are appropriate and generously given. A love and nuts board, which is similar to this, people just able to cathart, if you like, to rant about what they love about what's happening for them at the moment and what's driving them crazy, what's making them go nutty bored. And then, of course, the more public forums to nominate people for awards. Please, before you rush away from this film and onto where you're next going to, do think about self-care and how your own self-care can influence the culture and environment that you're creating for people that you lead. Also, please think about the extent to which and how you can, not how you might, but how you can talk about and take good action for team well-being through any of the ideas that we've talked about today. And that could be, of course, as we've said, paying attention to how you are, paying attention to how you can practically build your team's well-being and influencing your environment as a result. I do hope it's been useful. And of course, next time we talk about our final topic, which is very relevant to well-being, managing time. And I look forward to seeing you then.